Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new series of this podcast. We'll be developing a lot of ideas about music, about our tours, about our experience. Welcome, Chaz, and welcome everybody.
It's good to be back.
So I'm very excited about today's episode because we'll be talking about some of the Colombian music and culture. And this will be just like the common thread to also reflect on other topics of great relevance, of course, such as the export of national and cultural icons and the construction of certain identities around them, right? So the particular case of Colombia has always seemed very interesting to me, and I would like to develop this idea later. So, for example, on several occasions that I have had the opportunity to meet at some eclectic events, that means there are people from different geographical origins. When we begin to introduce ourselves, to refer to our place of origin, it usually happens that the rest of the person tries to look for some element characteristic of that mentioned country, right? So this in itself does not deserve a judgment now, because I think is in some way is something we do unconsciously to connect with that person we just have met, right? But sometimes the examples selected are not the luckiest, let's say, in some way. And now I will return to the topic of Colombia, why I'm saying all this introduction, because it happens that um, since there are some Colombians in this type of situation, I have seen the name of Pablo Escobar repeated, or allusions to drugs as an idea related to Colombian culture, right? Like, oh, you're from Colombia, Pablo Escobar, cocaine. So, beyond the real fact that have enhanced this, the construction of this image of Colombia, it always seemed unfair to me, because with so many great artists, international figures from Colombia, that the mantra of the drugs cartel still carries so much weight in the mind of people, right? So, not going too far or nor pretending to look very enlightened people here, let's not forget, for example, that some real international figures like Shakira, or intellectuals like Gabriel García Márquez, they are also Colombian, so why, when you meet someone from Colombia, you don't think like, oh, like Shakira or like Gabriel García Márquez? Why people is always thinking about Pablo Escobar? So taking this observation as a starting point, it seemed very important to me that we have met today to talk about um, the richness of Colombian culture, of the music in Colombia, some of its most important genres or cultural events, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So unfortunately, there's this history, of drug trade and narcos and Pablo Escobar, and unfortunately, for a lot of Americans and international community, it is one of the first things that pop to people's mind when they think of Colombia. I remember when I started going to Colombia and developing the tours, that my family was like, what are you doing in Colombia? I mean, they did that for Cuba too. They're like, of course, they think Cuba, like, oh, communism, Fidel Castro. But like, underneath these things, there's just a bunch more history to all these places, and unfortunately, because these things were very popular and they continue to make Netflix series like Narcos and things like that, it's that it continues this sort of image of Colombia, and people are scared to go to Colombia. Whereas I just saw the news yesterday that Gustavo, the president, just made another peace deal with one of the rebel groups, and they're working towards peace. And Colombia is a totally different place now than it was maybe in the 80s or 90s, and it's much safer. I mean, they still have their struggles, but they're moving in the right direction. But underneath all of that, there's their culture, there's their food, there's their music, there's their way of life. There's normalcy underneath anything that we think bad of a country. You know, we think, oh, Soviet Union, but we don't think like, oh, is Estonia might be really have this other thing we could discover, or Georgia, or these other countries that have, you know, these beautiful architecture, this beautiful culture, beautiful food, beautiful music. And so, you know, my interest in Colombia was to see what the music was, because I didn't know much about it. I'm convinced that every culture has something to offer as far as music and culture. And Colombia was really hard to find it. I mean, we'll get into this a little bit deeper, but you know, one of the things that I uncovered was, you know, like, where is the music? You know, you go to Medellin or Bogota, and you know, you have to kind of struggle to find like, what is Colombian music? It was very easy to stumble across, you know, like maybe go to a brewery or a bar, and then it's very popular there to have like American rock cover bands. I'm like, this isn't Colombian. I mean, I appreciate that they love American rock music. I mean, I grew up playing rock on the drums, and I learned all the songs, and you know, it's cool to hear them. But you know, you wouldn't travel to Colombia to hear that. You could just go to Las Vegas or New York, or you know, or go see the band themselves. You know, so actually, it took about a month. My wife and I went, you know, across the whole country for like, you know, to every major city that we could find, and it wasn't until the very end that we found what we were interested in, and that was in Cali, Colombia, which I'll elaborate a little bit more about that with the Petronio Alvarez Festival, La Música del Pacífico, and stuff like that. But yeah, Colombia in general has made a major transformation from what we think of them from the 80s or 90s, or what most people think of them, to where they're headed today. And you know, there's just some hidden gems there that I want to talk about today and share.
We can't deny the the complex history marked by this political instability, armed conflict in general, the rise of this powerful drugs cartel in the 80s and 90s. And I think, yes, I would like just to say, provide some context about this to really appreciate how important is these changes in Colombia regarding culture and music. And as you mentioned, this is still a difficult it's still difficult to find, right? A lot of cultural events, or music in a very obviously way, like in Cuba. Maybe you're just walking in the streets and you can find a lot of music. We are a very musical island. That's reality. um, but we can't forget that for decades the country was embroiled in a civil war between the government, the left-wing guerrilla groups, for example, and the right-wing, the paramilitary forces. But all of them were heavily involved in the lucrative drug trade. So is that controversial situation where they look, some of them pretend to be in a fair situation. They will trying to seize the control of the country's resources and territory because they want to take care of the good things in Colombia, but they were using these drugs, the cartels, the mafia. It's a kind of passive aggressive personality. In some way, we used to use this terminology right now. Now they're very common and popular because they have this Machiavellic, and they finance their operations through the production of cocaine and the traffic of cocaine. So it's what that means. That means a lot of assassinations, a lot of people die. We should not forget that. I can understand why is that so important, what is so strong, and the weight of all that past, right? Because this is still impacting the currently Colombian society. Thousands of civilians were caught in the crossfire between all these groups. So, and as I mentioned before, it's a kind of mantra. Sometimes when you're born in that situation, just think, let's try to put skin of these people, these kids that they was born in Medellin in the 80s or 90s with these very famous and powerful cartels in Medellin or Cali itself, and kids was born there, and that's the reality they know and they can access. Sometimes I won't say it's the easy way, because it's not easy to be part of a cartel and be involved in that thing. But it's the reality, it's the way of life, and that fear, that scare. And some people find themselves in the situation like, I want to be part of the people who's scaring, or I want to be part of the group who is taking the control of the situation. It's like you cannot provide a lot of options sometimes, right? So right now it's very important, all these social changes and cultural changes that the currently government and the last decades they are trying to convey the good intentions, right, in some way, the goodwill to change the situation in Colombia, and provide to those people this identity related to the culture, the music, their food. So
So one of the beautiful things about Colombia now, and we're just talking about like paramilitary groups and guerrillas and stuff like that. There's like a real there's a lot of evidence in how music and art can change things in Colombia, and one of the examples is with Comuna 13, which used to be one of the most dangerous places in the world, especially in Latin America, where they had all these military groups operating in this one comuna, this one part of the town of Medellin, which was up along the hillside, which is where like drugs and stuff were coming in from the mountains, and it was so kind of like an entryway where many people had different goals, but they were just normal citizens walking the street would be caught in crossfire and things like that. But when you go to Comuna 13 today, it's become a huge tourist destination, where they like to showcase that they have it graffitied. All it's this awesome graffiti everywhere, and they've graffitied like transformation, and that's like the key word, I think, is that they've been able to evolve with music and art. And you'll walk around Comuna 13 and there'll be these like hip hop breakdance shows, people freestyle rapping, and I mean, of course Colombia still has their things they're working out, but I mean this is totally different than what it was before. And I mean there's like vendors, people selling water bottles and other little things in the street, t-shirts, and the whole community has become reliant on tourism, which is much safer than any drug trade or anything like that. People, some people get involved with that stuff because they don't know what else to do. I mean, you grow up in a crime area, and you can easily just be a part of the crime. You're like, oh, you can easily make money, or some people are forced to, and many different things happen. But that's what I love about Francia, the current vice president in Colombia. She has called for, and using this as an example, what's happened in Comuna 13, and I'm sure there's many other examples. I saw her speech in live in Cali a couple years ago, and she was calling for music schools and art schools as a way to end the violence, to give kids something positive and productive to do. So I mean, there's multiple things to see right now in Colombia and be like, wow, I think it's not going to be easy. I mean, you can't just. I mean, they're not trying to like overthrow the cartels and the narcos and stuff. They're just trying to find some way to find peace, and maybe over time, the things with, it's hard because Colombia and Peru, I mean, that's where like the coca leaves and stuff grow. So I mean, it's always going to be a challenge if that's the place where the world can get cocaine, so they're going to struggle with that. But at the end of the day, is like, if we take people out of poverty and we give them an opportunity to go to music school or have some sort of economic opportunity that doesn't include drug trade or any other illegal thing that a lot of Colombians don't want, but they're not going to speak up and like cause a problem. They're just going to slowly find peace and negotiate between everybody, and slowly start to create this new generation of young people who are interested in music. And I think that's why it's also important to preserve music culture and history in each country. It's like, of course we have American music that like people like abroad, but there should be a sense of pride, and there is among some Colombians, to continue to practice what came from Colombia. Just like languages, indigenous languages that we continue to lose. we're losing indigenous and folkloric styles of music. They're becoming, as people get more interested in things like reggaeton and American rock music and pop music, they're forgetting like where all that stuff came from, and yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Mm, I just now you mentioned that, and we are talking since the beginning, like how important has been music to change all this situation. And now you mentioned like how we are losing these traditions, this folkloric music in some way. But we should remember that actually this folkloric music, this ancestral music, also helped these people, the slaves in Colombia, to survive and to affront a very difficult moment. So music and culture is being working as the right solution for many ways, right? So we can talk also about that past, link it to the Africans and the slavery, the colonialism period in Colombia, and how important it is to support those manifestations or those musical genres, or that it's been showing us how people survive and how people can be better, how people can struggle against in a very difficult situation, keep what they are through music, right? So I have understand that there is a very strong movement of enslaved Africans, right, to the Pacific coast, for example.
So I think it more started in like the Cartagena region, which was like the main port for the Spanish, between Cartagena and Havana, Cuba, and some other places, like Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic. But they would, the big one was in Cartagena. I mean, they would bring stuff from like Peru and other parts of Latin America, like gold and other things that the slaves were working on. They would bring all those things to the Cartagena port, and that's also where they would, transport a lot of slaves coming to South America. And so Cartagena, in some way, looks a lot like old Havana and has a lot of similar culture. I mean, they were actually trading slaves between Cartagena and Havana. So there would be some people who maybe were in Havana would come to Cartagena, and vice versa. But one of the more interesting things, and a lot of people don't know this, is that in Colombia, not too far from Cartagena, there's a town called San Basilio de Palenque, which was the first town ever freed from slavery. It's a really fascinating story. It also has to do with some of their music history, because as we know, as when slaves came over, they weren't like fully. They were basically prohibited from playing their music or doing. They weren't able to bring any drums or, as far as we know, like basically nothing. They just brought in their head what they used to do in Africa. They brought rituals, and and then when they got there, they figured out how to make things with fruit boxes and stuff like that. But in Cartagena, it was like this interesting thing happening where there was the first story of like real rebellion in the slavery era, where there were these San Basilio Palenque. It was an area where Africans were able to stay, and eventually they started to come to the port city and try to free other slaves. And there's this whole history of like them having to move further away from the city because they kept freeing the slaves, and they were really annoying the Spanish. And so the Spanish were like, look, this like unique deal, we'll give you your freedom. Well, we're gonna build a church there. You're gonna have to have a church, because we need you to have religion too, or our religion, not your African religions. And we want you to move a little further away so it's harder to get there, because they kept coming to the port and freeing as many slaves as they could and running away back to Palenque. And so they, as the Spanish, made this deal, and they became more strict on trying to prevent slaves from running away. I mean, in their mind, this is their asset. They're, trafficking a human from Africa to be like someone who they're gonna sell to the slave owner, and that's like one of their 10 slaves that is part of their workforce. So for them, they're all like, how do we protect our workforce? And the slaves were the slaves that were in Palenque were completely I don't know, heroic in a way, because they kept trying different ways. And one of the ways they would do that is they would actually, the women that were able to go into some of the quarters with other slaves were able to braid maps into the women's hair, and they would have different colors and different representations of like how to get to Palenque, and it could take months. This was what, they didn't have a car. They, maybe if they were lucky they could find a horse, but I mean the colonial times, everything was very strict and they're watching everything. But so many people made that journey because they got maps weaved into their hair. It's a really interesting story, but at the same time, um, there was this kind of history going on of like early development of like cumbia music and champeta, other Afro-Colombian styles. All the percussion and dancing and stuff was kind of being able to happen here. And downriver, there's some famous rivers. The river Magdalena River is one of the main rivers where they had like a lot of the slaves would work between. So Colombia is very mountainous, so it's hard to like climb over the mountains and make your way. So we really kind of see this weird geography thing going on in Colombia where you have a lot of music history around what they call the Atlantic coast, which is really the Caribbean, but they say like La Música del Atlántico. And you see that there's a lot of Afro-Colombian percussion and folkloric styles and folkloric singing and other things going on the Atlantic coast,
Mhm.
as they would call it. And then downriver, they were able to make kind of like near the Cali region to get to the Pacific coast. And so there's kind of these like hidden gems along the coast that most people don't see because, I mean, it may not be safe to go by yourself. You would have to go with like a tour group or with people to get to these areas. And it's just not something that they're really even in Cartagena. A lot of the music venues since COVID have shut down that played like champeta music with live bands and things like that. So it's like it's becoming less and less important in the mainstream. And tourists don't even know. They come to Cartagena and they want to go to the beach. They want to, they want to do all the luxury stuff, but they're not like, they think maybe salsa dance or something. They don't know any of these folkloric styles. So we kind of see this development of folkloric styles along the edge, which had to do with how slaves were able to settle and find their space. And they sort of disconnected from society because just like everything post-slavery is like, okay, slavery ended, but nobody really wanted to intertwine. We had in the United States, we had segregation and the Jim Crow, and it was like 100 years of like before the civil rights movement of okay, slaves are freed, but they're not able to do anything. They're completely oppressed. They don't get any jobs. They're not getting any money. So this happened in Colombia too. It was like everybody was kind of pushed to the coast. And then the rest of normal society, as they developed in Colombia and places like Medellin and Bogota, you don't even really see that many African Colombians. There's mostly just like white Colombians. And obviously don't see the music. They don't perform the music. And they got more interested in like, there's some other folkloric styles with like, like guitar, and actually also tango music got really popular in Medellin, which is originally from Argentina, but it's almost equally as important in Medellin. They have like a tango, like a tangaria. They have like places you can go see really good tango music. But it's just been this giant disconnect. And when I traveled to Colombia, I went around all over the place. I got to Cali, and I'm like, just learning about Cali, and everybody's like, "Oh, you just missed the Petronio Alvarez Festival." What is that? And so I went and took a percussion lesson on the marimba. They have these handmade marimbas, and there's really a lot of handmade percussion. And I started learning about that music. And for me, at this moment in my life, I think it's like the coolest music I've ever found. And it's just a hidden gem. Like nobody knows about it. You go to Medellin, I talk to people I know that are Colombian that like maybe aren't musicians, and they're like, "Oh, I think I've heard of Petronio Alvarez." And mind you, this is some huge, festival from the cultural ministry in Cali that's like, free, that you can go to. I mean, you can go buy things or whatever, but like the music part is free, and it's just this beautiful folkloric music, this kind of a hidden gem. But all at the same time, there seems to be this interconnection going on between, we see some of these artists going to Cuba. We just recently saw the Colombia and Cali and the Petronio Alvarez Festival have an intercultural change in the New Orleans Jazz Festival. So
Wow.
it was like this kind of like thing that I'd never heard about. We never really seen anybody talk about it or promote it. And then all of a sudden, the last 5 years, we start to see things moving up. And I also give a little credit to like Francia, the vice president. She's from the Pacific Coast, and
Mm.
she's trying to promote and intertwine more Colombian culture to Colombians. Actually, a lot of Colombians from like Bogota, Medellin, like they actually don't really travel that much within their own country. So they don't actually get to see what their country has to offer. And that kind of goes back to being scared from the narcos, like the 80s and 90s. And, there were many different bad things that happened. So people kind of just stayed where they were. Um, but yeah, anyway, Samba Ciudad Palenque is very interesting story as far as like being the first town. It's UNESCO World Heritage Site, being the first town ever freed from slavery, but also that it was like in the early days, music and revolution were like together. So like they got to play their music, they got to go to their town and develop. We got if it wouldn't have been for these little things that happened in history, we may not have seen the same development. Same's true for New Orleans and Cuba as well, but they maybe aren't as popular as what we see in Colombia. So I think that's an interesting discovery that deserves more and more attention.
That's another stereotype in some way about Colombian music. Like a lot of people know salsa or reggaeton from Colombia, but they don't know that much about this music, the music from the Pacific region. And actually, I love the way Colombians made it like in a unique way, the salsa or the reggaeton. We know these two genres, they are not from Colombia, but of course Colombians are making great in that way. But this music from the Pacific region actually is a powerful spiritual tool, right? And means of resistance during years or decades or centuries even. So you've been talking about the Petronio Alvarez Festival, and I'm very curious now to hear more about it and how is the festival, because you've been there. I still don't have that lucky moment, not yet. So I would love to hear more about that festival.
They will have the whole musical Getaways team go to. I mean, this is something I definitely want to share with all of our team. But Petronio Alvarez was a famous composer, and of course they named the festival after him. But what's unique about it in this moment, especially, is that of course these artists are all from the Pacific Coast, and if you have the right connections, I do have the connections, but I haven't actually been to the Pacific Coast yet. It's in my future plans to go there. Actually, maybe we might even develop a tour there once we have that solidified. But places like Buenaventura, the port city, and then up along there's all these little pueblos, all these little small villages and towns all on the Pacific Coast. And basically these all these artists that are in these Pacific, the style, they say la música del Pacífico, which actually has like many different styles within it, even different instrumentation. There's different instrumentation on the north part than there is on the south part. In one section you may see like duos of clarinets and some stuff that actually sounds like New Orleans music. So that's an interesting connection too. There's not a lot of stuff written about this. We got to like
Well,
really
the
really
African
dig.
root is there.
The what?
So the African root.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
That's
it's
why it sounds similar.
yeah. I mean, and but also, I mean, one thing that kind of showed me the interesting part of the Pacific Coast is that there's different parts of Africa that brought different instrumentation. I mean, we see that there are some slaves that made their way to Colombia, but maybe not the same parts of Africa was had slaves that went to Cuba, for example. And so we see different instrumentation. Even though it was all from Africa, there's different things going on in West Africa than the Congo or Northern Africa. And there's musicologists, I guess, have went deep into like what things came from what areas and what type of instruments. But in a general perspective, since this Pacific coast of Colombia has been so isolated from the rest of society through the drug trade and the lack of the systemic racism that exists in Colombia. Actually, if we're going to say exactly what it is this disconnection from the developing society and the rest of Colombia, which they just sort of almost seems like a different country. But the beautiful thing about the Petronio Alvarez Festival is that all these artists who play all year in their communities, and they have bringing up little kids and teach, just like we see like in matanzas in Cuba where like little kids are learning to be little rumberos and stuff, you know. So they're like bringing up the children to learn the rituals and to learn the how to play drums and play marimba and different instruments. And the beautiful thing about Petronio Alvarez is that once per year there's this, and it's actually a competition, which is weird because I have weird feelings about music and competition or art and competition, but I think it's fun for them because it creates a lot of energy in the festival. You know, the first day is not as energetic as the last day, where it's the finale of the competition. So only once per year does the people who live on the Pacific Coast and the artists get to come to Cali, and almost all of them do. I mean, it's like something they look forward to and they practice for and they prepare for a long time, and they come to Cali, which is a more international city. You know, you can fly directly there from Miami, of course, from internally from Bogota, Medellin, Cartagena, all these other major cities, and you know, even other parts of Latin America. And you know, there's more of an international audience there. There's people from Europe, there's people from the United States. There are people like us who know about it and want to see it. So you know, you'll see some tourists there. Not a lot of tourists, you know, believe it or not. But you know, everybody will come for this one festival once per year, and it's just kind of this special moment where maybe you couldn't make it to Buenaventura or to these little pueblos on the Pacific Coast, but you can kind of, they bring all that with them, and it's this opportunity once per year to kind of see all this music. So you can hear what's on the north part, what's in the south part, and you get to hear all the different styles in one long weekend, basically. And they also share their food. They have this unique type of seafood. I believe like mussels or clams, something like that, and like different types of rice and fish. They cook their fish a certain way. They have this alcohol called viche, which is very interesting. I've had like very sweet ones. I've had spicy ones. They put like herbs in it. There's all different types of viche. Um, and they just bring it all. They bring their fashion too. I mean, they have more of a traditional African style of fashion where, you know, you have the shirts that kind of have the V-neck that have like all the cool designs like yellow and red and green, and so they, you know, there's some of these like homemade. They make these, you know, and they bring them over and they sell them, and everybody sets up different booths, and it's really a great opportunity to support the economy of the Pacific Coast. And with the new presidency, with Francia and Gustavo, they actually are creating more opportunity on the Pacific Coast and trying to interconnect. Like, for example, politically speaking, the Pacific Coast and a lot of these places that were far off, like Palenque even, weren't really a part of the electorate process to select their government. And so now, and I saw this in Palenque recently, they had, and I guess it's sort of like their Democratic Party, you know, because they're to the left, but their Democratic Party like built a brand new building, like to connect that party, their political party, with the people of Palenque. So I haven't seen that on the Pacific Coast, but I'm assuming that they're doing the same, because they're trying to get more reach to be more democratic, I guess, right? Because they're trying to get more people in the country to be more involved with the voting process. So it's going to be interesting to see how this develops, to see maybe how this music could be included in more academic studies, because I think that there's been a neglect through systemic racism to include this history. Because, I mean, you don't hear a lot of musicians talking. I mean, really good musicians that I've talked to in like Medellin, they're like, "Oh, I love Petronio Alvarez." I mean, musicians in Colombia appreciate it, but I don't think it's came into the mainstream, you know. So I mean, the idea would be like, just try to get all the Colombians to come to Petronio Alvarez and learn something great about their culture and the whole world. I mean, coming to Petronio Alvarez is sort of this, for me, is like a chill bumps thing. You know, you just listen to some music that you really love, and it just makes you feel a certain way, and it's very happy music. And you know, this very expressive, the way that they're singing and like a choir. You know, um, it's fascinating. I absolutely love this festival. I mean, I love Cuban music and Brazilian music too, but the Pacific music in Colombia is sort of like locked in on my ears in the last couple years.
I'm getting jealous now. It sounds amazing. They made a way to unite all these people for this specific moment, right? And even the part of the competition, I love it because it's a challenge. No, you're keeping all these kids like practicing, studying, like they're providing a motivation or a reason to improve themselves in this kind of music. So I think it's lovely. How you think this kind of events or festival is helping to change that past of racism or colonialism, and that idea about this kind of music, because it's coming from the slavery. It used to have a bad connotation or reputation, but now they are changing that, right, to make it like a reason to feel proud, and to show to the rest of the world, to explore now a new cultural icon or image of Colombia.
I've only been there a couple times, but multiple times, because in Cali they actually do have like this a good friend of mine, Nasim, who I've studied percussion with, and there is some of the artists and stuff are active in Cali, so there is a part of the culture, though it's not the primary thing that they like to brag about. We talked about a little bit earlier. They kind of brag about it being the capital of salsa, which is ironic. We're going to have another episode about salsa and how it evolved from soul music in Cuba. But they sort of, we see that too. Like, who was it, the Dominican Republic or someone recently was like, we're going to make salsa our national music. And I mean, it's beautiful. Salsa is beautiful music. I mean, of course, they have their own variation of it, but it almost sounds exactly like soul music. And, so there is kind of these multiple things going on in Cali. I think Cali, for me, is one of the more interesting, not as touristic places like Cartagena or Medellin, but a place where you're actually seeing a lot of culture. It's kind of becoming a melting pot. So I think it's affecting Cali mostly now with of course, Petronio Alvarez has been there for years. So it is, something that people in Cali might know more about than maybe Bogota, so I don't know how long it'll take or what it'll mean for that culture to spread. I would just hope that to fight systemic racism is that they get, from music historians and musicologists and, academics, that they could just include that history a little more in the teaching of young people and music and things like that. I mean, we see maybe more classical styles, and I know that's normal to music programs to have classical music, but just to have a little bit more mixture of like what came from your country and teach that. I know folkloric music kind of gets a mixed reputation with professional musicians because folkloric music has imperfections. So for example, a lot of the folkloric music you hear on the Pacific Coast, they don't actually sing directly to what we have on the keyboard. There's some stuff that they're a little flat or sharp. I had a musician friend explain this to me. He's a really great piano player, and he actually, I'm not a singer, but he actually sang the correct interval that you would have on a piano, and but then he flattened it on this these moments that he would go up, but they wouldn't be in a perfect interval in relation to the keyboard or the piano.
That's very subjective, Chaz. That way of thinking about, just think about the folk word is an invention of the academical way of thinking in some though. So folk music is not the regular word to talk about other kind of music. Like they create their own terminology to make a difference between this is the music we play and that's the music they play. Like that's folk music. That's not classical music. So
Right.
but right now we are in this moment of the history where we can look back and say, okay, well, that's not really fair. All of this is music, and I don't think it's better one than other, because music is an emotion and it's an alive thing. So some classical music, of course, musicians, they are great performance. They find a way to really connect with that emotion or feelings, like Mozart or Beethoven or Bach or wherever you want. But it's that music is an emotion, and you can say the same with these other styles, with this other variation. And maybe they don't want to sing in that perfect pitch because it's not about that. And the standards for what they want to say is not about that specific tone. It's like, I don't care about that. This music is not about that. So that just means sometimes that you just don't understand or some people don't understand each other, or some musics don't understand each other because they are trying to judge the other music like their own music. So if a classical musician is trying to say, "Oh, that's not perfect, that's not good," because it's taking into account their own standards for their own music, but this is another mean, it's another expression, and it has a different standards. It's just that.
I mean, I think that's the right way to look at it is like, if you're classically trained, to still my friend of mine, he the one who explained and really loved this. He is probably a classically. I mean, he's like a director of like a tango band, so he plays piano on a high level. I'm pretty sure he went to music school, but he still, as a musician, appreciates the folkloric music in Colombia, because when they do sing from in a perspective of imperfection with the intervals, there's an emotion to that that's awesome. I mean, that maybe that came from how they were singing in Africa or something like that, and they weren't trained, in music school to be like, okay, no, if you didn't hit, if you went C, F, C, G, and you like were G sharp, you would be told you were doing something wrong. But otherwise, if you were learning some old folkloric song that you were taught, or way to sing, you thought it was correct. But when you listen to the Pacific music, for me, it gives me, like, communicates to me, a feeling that they maybe have in their civilization, or in their town, or through their religion, or through, however this came about. It strikes me differently than if I heard some classical choir singing, quote unquote, perfectly, or so I think that's a beautiful thing that we have to appreciate, is that it may not even actually be on the keyboard. It might be similar to like was like a microtone or something, that's like, like in you hear it in, like, you hear it in some of the Spanish singing and some of the Indian singing, where
Yes.
they
Mhm.
bend a little bit out of,
Release.
yeah. But I think that's cool. Even when I hear like folklore, or like flamenco singers do that too, I'm like, man, that's so it strikes me as a really interesting thing, because maybe we listen to music too much that's like too perfect, with pop music these days and stuff. To go listen to folkloric music and live choir singing with imperfections and timing that might speed up or slow down, it's just real. I guess that's the best way I can say it, is it's just real. But yeah, I think the Petronio Alvarez is something. The festival is something that any music lover should experience. Anyone who wants to get out of their box, and we hear a lot of jazz music these days that's really great, and a lot of musicians playing on a high level. But it's different, I think, to go hear something from a society that's been kind of isolated for a long time and is very passionate about their music. It's so cool to me to hear when someone really enjoys and is so. I mean, they even dress up a certain way. It's like a whole it's a whole thing. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to go do that for the weekend. Like, these people are living their music and their culture and their food and their fashion, and it's just a part of who they are, and I think that's beautiful. And yeah, we're coming up soon on Petronio Alvarez in August, so we're doing our tour. And of course, anybody who is interested in this podcast, if you want to come with us, we'll have a link in the description. We would love to have you. Any closing thoughts, Rocio?
I just think right now I'm just convinced that Petronio Alvarez is a must see. Of course, you can travel to Colombia, to Cali, wherever you want, and enjoy the weather or the food and everything. But if you have a good reason like this one, like I would like to take something really deep about what is Colombia and how they are, how they sound, and how they taste in some way. I think this Petronio Alvarez sounds like the perfect opportunity. I'm very happy to hear your own experience and that you share it with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rocio. Until the next one.